After World War I, there were a number of American artists who really felt strongly that American art needed to make a clean break from European influence. They saw the modern movements that were arising in Europe and looked around them in America and said, we can do something that's truly our own. So that's where American regionalism comes from. There are artists in different parts of the country that want to look to the history and styles and idioms and even that sense of humor and sense of fashion, that the things that really reflect their own region and their own identity. And they want to play those up in paintings that are predominantly naturalistic, but that have their own sort of turns on visual style. So here we have Grant Wood's American Gothic. Grant Wood came out of the rural Midwest of the United States. He was a very skilled painter, well trained, and he was inspired to make this painting by the architectural style of the house that you see in the background. That style is called Carpenter Gothic. And if you look at the window that's in between the two figures' heads, the window in that house, the shape of that arch is a Gothic arch. So, making a reference to the Gothic and all that it represents in Europe, making that reference in an American painting, it sort of puts a greater emphasis on what is American as opposed to European in the painting. So it's a rural scene. We see a man and a woman, and if you look at their faces, it's clear that the man is considerably older than the woman. Their postures give the impression that the man is the woman's father, and he's sort of guarding her, like he's sort of standing there with his pitchfork, sort of like saying, "If you're going to get to me, if you're going to get to her, you're going to have to come through me first." So look at the shape of the pitchfork that the man is holding. The shape of the pitchfork is sort of echoed in the stitching on his bib overalls and the stripes of his shirt, very visually unified by those repeated elements. The shapes of the ovals of their faces are repeated elements that you see in different parts of the painting. The sort of roundness of the tops of the heads is echoed by the roundness of the trees in the distance. It's visually a strongly unified painting, and it has a sort of strange sense of humor to it, in that you're not really sure whether you're supposed to be laughing or not. You're not sure whether it's supposed to be satirical or serious, and that's one of the things that's so compelling about it, and why people keep coming back to it. In this detail, you can see that it is a very skillfully rendered painting. You look at the texture of the hair, the detail of the eyes, and on the porch in the background of the porch of the house, you can see the little house plants and the cactus that are on the porch, and the way that the shade has been rolled up just a little bit crookedly. Just very fun, delicate little touches there. So the painting was immediately popular. It immediately struck a chord with its audience, and it was reproduced in newspapers and magazines all over the country, and was a big hit. This photograph on the left shows the models for the painting. Grant Wood painted the young lady, modeled by his sister, and the model for the older man was his dentist. And on the right, you see the house that was supposedly the inspiration for the painting. The way that Grant Wood's American Gothic had become a widespread sort of visual reference point in American culture is really reflected by this photograph by Gordon Parks. Gordon Parks was a black photographer, and he was there. There weren't a whole lot of black photographers that reached his degree of success in his time. He's photographing a woman who's working as a cleaning woman in the halls of Congress. So here's another painting that you probably recognize. Edward Hopper's Nighthawks has been very much imitated and parodied over the years, has inspired many. To try to look at it with fresh eyes, you're seeing a city scene. It's New York City. There's nobody on the street. It feels very empty and dark. There's a lot of empty space. There's a cafe on the right that feels very modern, very smooth, undecorated, unornamented surfaces. And the windows of this cafe are so vast. It's like the people inside in this brightly lit cafe are in some sort of a fishbowl scenario. So we can see what they're doing. They don't really seem particularly self-conscious. Each of them seems sort of drawn into their own world and their own thoughts. um, Edward Hopper's paintings, and this one in particular, are often described as having a sense of melancholy or a sense of alienation. Edward Hopper wasn't said to have intended a certain mood or a certain sensibility. He really wants to leave it up to the viewer to take from it what they will. But he did make this painting right after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, right after he started on it right after the United States entered World War II, and it had changed the way that people felt in the city of New York, and that affected the way that the artist was painting at that time. When you see Edward Hopper's paintings, you often want to like find out something more from these people. They seem so inside of themselves, but you get so close to these faces, and you realize they're not going to tell you any more when you're closer to them than they did before. That they're still keeping their secrets to themselves. Edward Hopper made many paintings of these kinds of moody, quiet city moments where people are sort of inside of their own thoughts, like the young lady on the right who's an usher in a movie theater, more interested in whatever's on her mind than whatever might be on the movie theater screen. And even the people watching the movie are not sitting together; even they are separate from each other. In addition to the New York City scenes, Edward Hopper painted many scenes of rural northeastern life, like the one that you see here. So some of the paintings have a degree of abstraction that makes them almost completely abstract when you first glance at them. It takes a minute to even register the subject material of the paintings. The one on the left, the caption reads, "The migrant whose life had been rural and nurtured by the earth was now moving to urban life dependent on industrial machinery." And on the right, "Some left because of promises of work in the north, others left because their farms had been devastated by floods." Couldn't resist dropping a Pittsburgh reference in there. Pittsburgh's one of the numerous cities that Jacob Lawrence tells about in the series of paintings. So you can see that the folks arriving in Pittsburgh here by train look pretty optimistic about their chances in this new city where they see the smoke rising from the chimneys in the distance. And things don't necessarily turn out all that well in the cities that they settle in. Housing was a serious problem, is the caption that you see for the image on the left, and on the right they also find discrimination in the north, although it was much different from that they had known what they had known in the south. So look at what he does with the overlapping railings of stairways and beds in the composition on the left. It becomes almost abstract, and on the right you can see this sort of gold. Runner that divides the space in between the white area of the restaurant and the black area of the restaurant. Romare Bearden is another of the painters to emerge from the Harlem Renaissance. This painting is roughly contemporaneous with the Great Migration series, and it's relatively naturalistic, but it has that sort of modern feeling to the way that he sort of stylizes the faces and the body forms of the factory workers. So Romare Bearden works in a number of different media, and by the 1960s, he started working in photo montage. So the way that he does these photo montages, he would cut and tear sections of imagery from magazines, put his collage together, photograph it, and then blow that photograph up large and mount it on a panel, and sometimes even at mural scale. This one is 3 feet tall, 4 feet wide. So that's photo montage. The imagery is a biblical scene. The prevalence of ritual tidings. The figure on the left, it has the sort of winged shapes that suggest an angel of an annunciation, and on the right, we seem to be seeing the Virgin Mary, who's turning her face slightly away from the angel, but sort of accepting the embrace. So remember how in the Renaissance you would see biblical scenes presented as if they were taking place in Renaissance times. So you would see an Annunciation scene where Mary is dressed in Renaissance clothing and in a in Renaissance architecture. It's a very commonplace way of interpreting biblical scenes in that time. This is like a modern version of that. So in the 1960s, he's making a contemporary interpretation of a biblical scene that you can tell by the train in the distance and the kinds of elements of architecture that are around them, that it's taking place in modern times, and it really reflects the importance of the Christian narrative and stories on African American culture.